Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic, and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. One of the things I find incredibly cool about being a shamanic practitioner with 25 years of experience doing this professionally is that even with all those years and all those experiences, I still get new possibilities and ideas and suggestions to support people coming in all the time. And so this podcast is inspired from a conversation that I was having with one of my clients, and she was recommending to me a very special branch of yoga that does some really cool things for connecting with your body and allowing it to align and all this really cool stuff. And it was clear from just how much her voice lit up that this was something that was just so the sweet spot for her, so the absolute right medicine that she'd found that worked incredibly well for her. And what the guide showed me was that she has mastery of this. She's gone through this program, and process. We all have these processes that we can do. So maybe you go through a yoga class and then, you lay out at the end and let the energy move and integrate. Or maybe you do fire ceremony and you release things that are no longer needed. Or you do the transmutation breath where you breathe something into your heart chakra and exhale neutrality to take things apart. Maybe you do breath work and you wake up vitality. Maybe you have a really good energetic cleansing ritual that you go through. Maybe there's a series of yoga poses that are really restorative. Maybe Qigong is really your jam. So all of these are wonderful. I have a lot of people who have been serious committed meditators, but what was dropped in for this particular client was an invitation to sort of own her mastery of the process that, she might spend 20 minutes going through this particular process and getting really good results. And the notion that there's a mastery and an anchoring of that. So the guides were inviting her to try on the possibility of just pulling that energy in over a 30-second period or a 2-minute period to just really, really connect with the team of guides that she knew from working with that and her body's knowledge of how to shift, because she'd done all of these times of shifting from point A, however stressed or activated or whatever she was up to point B, which was, this really, really nice improvement, and that she could have her body and her energy body and her soul and her team of guides and the mastery of this, whatever language you want to put to it, allow her to just take a few breaths and make the transition and the shift into this kind of thing. So a couple of caveats on this. The guides say, if you're really, really friggin' activated, you probably need to go through like all the steps of the process. So if you're a seasoned meditator, it may be that on an average Tuesday when everything's pretty relaxed and you just notice, I'm a little distracted, and you can be like, whew, okay, I know how to meditate. And you move yourself into this energetic place that you visited by way of meditation. And this doesn't mean that you give up meditating completely, but you might be able to just shift into that in a very, very short amount of time. However, if it's a really activating moment, if you just got laid off from your job, or, somebody you care about is in the hospital, or you experienced a social rejection, which lights up a lot of the same parts of the brain as physical pain, or you had all of these kind of things, you might need to go through a few more steps. So this is most available to us when we're in a calm, centered place. And then there's some technique or practice that we would take a journey through to reliably arrive in another place. And I think everybody has their go-to. For one person, it might be dancing around to music, or it might be partnered dancing. I know when I was in college, I was on the ballroom dance team. I wasn't very good at it, but we were about people being really good at it. And so I can literally say I left school to dance in Las Vegas, but it was only for a weekend and with the ballroom dance team. So not nearly as racy or fun as it might sound, but there are things that are just so effective. For one person, the ocean might do it if they're like, whew, if I could just get my feet in the sand. And one of the things I work with, because for me, travel is a really potent experience. I experience different flavors of land in all these different places. And the other night I was sitting out in the hot tub, and one of my favorite shamanic practitioners in the world, Kay Gillard, we connected years ago, and she's just marvelous person. And she has gone on a journey of moving to her heart's home, which happens to be Glastonbury, England, that has the Chalice Well and the Tor. So it's super cool because she often posts pictures from her hanging with these really sacred places that are a really good way to fill her up. And I have a dream that someday I'll be able to spend, multiple weeks hanging in the Glastonbury area and getting to just hang with all these energies. But on this, random evening at the beginning of March, as I'm hanging in my hot tub and noticing that I have a tax bill coming up, and so probably shouldn't be hopping on a plane for a variety of reasons, I just was really connecting with the energy, and I've been there, so I could really use my shamanic ability to tune into the energy of the place. And for sure, it's not the same as being there, but it's a lot less money and time. And I don't have to sit on a plane for 11 hours because it's a really long flight, and then figure out how to, drive a car out of London, which I've done a couple of times. And, it's kind of sporting, it takes a minute to get up to speed with roundabouts on the opposite side of the road. It's an undertaking. So all of this is to say, when I was sitting in the hot tub, I wasn't particularly activated or triggered or dealing with big emotions, but I was feeling a little bit of ennui, and it was a really elegant way. I've done that with Iceland or Hawaii. These are really great ways where the flavor of the land that would be really supportive is something I can connect with. Death Valley is another example. It's about a 6-hour drive, and so it's a commitment to get up to the land, and there isn't a lot of lodging or infrastructure, at least not in the budget that I have for spending on lodging. I'm not really that fond of camping. So being able to put my hands on a rock from there and feel the energy and let it move through me with my intention and focus is really useful. So I'd invite you to think about, what is your go-to thing? For some people, it's taking a walk in nature. If I could just get out in the forest, if I could just be at a beach with my feet in the sand, if I could just feel the wind on my face, if I could just watch a beautiful sunset. My guides sometimes recommend the Nature Channel, where people will put a camera on a beach at sunset and just let it film the waves coming in and out as the sun goes down. The camera is stationary. It's just, you're looking at your screen. I'm surprisingly charmed. At the point that I'm recording this, up in Big Bear, there's a pair of mated eagles that have 3 baby chicks that were just born, and they've got an infrared, so the eagles can't see the light, but they've got a camera that's pointed at the nest, and you get to see, this eagle at night tucking its head, under its wing to stay warm, because there's snow around the nest, and them, bringing back a fish and giving little bites to the little tiny, alien looking little beings that they're keeping alive. And they've been doing this for a lot of years, and it's just a really cool thing. And I think it's really cool to log on and see that 20,000 people are sitting there at the same time, just looking at an eagle sitting on a nest with, this view of a beautiful lake, hanging out, having its experience. And the nice thing is that's really attainable. You don't have to spend a lot of money. You don't have to carve out all of this time. But I can really feel my nervous system regulating with just even this little nibble of, connection to the natural world. And so I think it's, again, really useful to identify what are your just most reliable, all is well, things feel good. And think about the notion that you might still go through the whole process, especially if you're activated, you've got a lot of chemistry, if there's a bunch of adrenaline and cortisol that you're trying to work with. Yeah, you might need to sit down and do that 20-minute meditation that you've, been doing for such a long time. And you might do it anyway because there's some really beautiful territory along the way. But you also might own this internal mastery that says, okay, I have a lot of visceral lived somatic experiences in my body and my energy body and my brain of what it feels like to go through this practice. So just calling in the practice and connecting with it and allowing yourself to make a real-time shift in just a few breaths to who you would become if you went through all the steps of the practice. And this isn't something if you're, doing yoga for the first time, this is based on sort of harvesting the mastery that you've established with this body in this lifetime with this practice. The ones you have the most affinity for, you may have gotten really good at in past lives as well. So, it isn't a non-yoga person, being like, oh, I'm just going to call in the feeling of doing yoga. You can use your intention and focus that way. I'm not saying don't, but the really super specific advice from the guides was really about being able to evoke this. Another caveat, in addition to the you probably won't get good results if you're really activated. Similarly, the activation could be the fight or flight, or the activation could be emotionality. And this isn't meant to be a spiritual bypass of emotions. We really kind of need to breathe through our emotions and be present with our emotions and not overindulge them and not numb and suppress them. And it's a whole other human mastery that, is probably one of the most critical things and comparatively so poorly understood. And it's just, I could talk for multiple podcasts on being in right relationship with your emotions. And it's such a universal problem that there's a lot of wisdom. There are a lot of really good books on Amazon and podcasts and scientific research about how our brains work on emotion, and therapists who shared really, really great techniques. There's so much wisdom out there. One of the best things I ever did related to kind of emotional wisdom was this course called Expand the Box. And it's definitely an in-person, and I don't think there are that many people who teach it, but it was a really, really rich foundational kind of thing. Brene Brown, she's big on helping us have some good competence with being these emotional beings who sometimes think. And so recognizing that if you're trying for an emotional bypass, which a lot of us feel a lot of things we're not much enjoying, that's not what this is designed for. However, if you've gotten stuck in an emotional pattern, if you've gotten, for some reason, it's kind of like they talk about in certain meditations, let the emotions move through like clouds in the sky, like weather, they're just having their experience. If you, kind of lassoed the cloud and are holding on to it and are really anchored in the experience, then this technique could be a really good one to try. And if it doesn't work, ideally, you're working with something that's really a favorite thing of yours that feels really good, so you can go back to it. There are certain people, we talk about techniques, but for me, there are certain people whose wisdom has a vibrational transmission, and it's just really nice to listen to their voice. One of my teachers, Sean Roop, teaches classes, and I know that even if I don't have a lot of mental ahas, there's an energetic transmission. Pema Chodron is another one. I was talking politics with someone, and he was kind of getting stirred up, and I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry, here's why I think it's going to be okay, I hope. And I just really didn't want to have a conversation that left him all activated. He's like, well, your reasoning is sound, but mostly I'm just listening to your voice and it's making me feel better. So kind of, the vibration of someone's voice, it could be something that you pulled in with a much shorter snippet, because sometimes we don't have the luxury of 20 or 30 minutes to do something. And so these really quick ability to reorient and shift. And for anyone who's dealing with anxiety, one of the things that my guides talk about over and over and over again is people want to make this project of calming their anxiety. And it's great. There's lots of good things to learn about anxiety, but there's also a fundamental nature that even people without a trauma history who have just gone through really benevolent circumstances, but we have hunter-gatherer biology that makes us nervous Nellies, that has all this reactivity that we mostly don't have skills to reckon with, so we end up tuning out. And so the persistence of self-soothe in a really short moment, proactively, when you don't feel triggered, of just coming home to yourself and noticing activation. And, it can be simple things like taking some slow, deep breaths and bringing your shoulders down and sort of learning these momentary things, because again, people want to make it this project of okay, I need to heal my nervous system. And that oftentimes can be a journey where people just seem like they just think they're going to get to a certain place, and then quite a lot of resources down the line are still working with that. So often my guides provide the counter of saying, don't make it a big project, just make it persistent. Make it like, a reminder in your phone. So every hour you're taking a couple of slow, deep breaths and taking the tension out of your body. And I think that's why things like the Calm app that can be set up to help us and give us some structure in doing that have such good, like if you look at the science of how they help people, they can really prove that like people who use the Calm app are having much better results, because it's this sort of proactive working with these kind of things. And so anyway, there's kind of a lot here, but I would just really invite you to kind of make a list of, when you're feeling something you don't want to feel, when you're off your center, when you have brain fog, when things are scattered, when you're not being present, when you're feeling anxiety, like all these different things, what really helps with it. And then you might try doing the few breaths version of point A to point B. And if that doesn't work, by all means, go use the full practice. These full practices are really great, and they can be marvelous at systematically moving us from a very activated state to a much more peaceful, expansive, relaxed, present, back out of stress state and into thrive state, with all the good things that happen, like turning our immune system and our digestive system and all of that back on, and cellular repair. Like there's a lot of just biological processes that get shut down if we've got this, this low level stress going on. So it's keeping the list, but it's also starting to recognize mastery that you may have onboarded in a way that you can apply that differently. And I just thought it was such a neat thing to offer. You'll see my former engineer self, which is still very much an archetype of mine, peeking through, and I'm like, most results for least effort, because life is really full. Adulting takes a lot of time. There are a lot of really cool experiences we can have, even just home, sitting and watching the live stream of eagles keeping their chicks alive. And so the more that we can, really, really set ourselves up to thrive as efficiently as possible, I think that really serves us. And so sometimes, you can just tune into the wisdom. Like if you've studied Brene Brown a lot, you could have a momentary take a breath. What would Brene Brown say? Or what would Byron Katie say? Or what would Pema Chodron say? And you're sort of opening up the file and giving yourself access to a certain vibration of energy. What would it feel like to be the place on the planet that I would love to be? And so it's just, helping us to use our incredible mental capacities in some really cool ways to make some shifts and to access wisdom that we've onboarded, but to get to do it in a shortcut kind of way can be pretty darn useful. So hopefully there's something there for you. I thought it was a cool message. It's the first time I remember my guides saying this to me. It doesn't mean they didn't at some other time, but I wanted to pass it on and to offer it to you. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.